The University of Nebraska-Lincoln, providing distance education opportunities for over 100 years. Go online to see what UNL has for you.
Again, and thanks for joining us for Lifestyle Gardening. I'm Kim Todd, and on today's program we'll be focusing on ornamental grasses and showing you how to prune your grapevines. We'll also be taking a look at color combinations for your containers. But up first on our program, we'll be featuring early season cole crops. It's a little early to get things started indoors, but growing season is right around the corner, and picking out your cold season crops is a great idea. Here's some good tips to get you started. Time for gardeners to start thinking a little bit about those early season crops they want in the vegetable garden. It's a little too early in the season to start seeds inside for some things. On the other hand, it's never too early to start gathering those seeds and thinking about what you want in your salads or on your dinner table. We call them cole crops, not cold crops, because they're broccolis and cauliflowers and Brussels sprouts and those kinds of things that are really good for you, but they also really like cold conditions or cooler conditions. What you want to look for is seeds that are 30, 45 to 60 days from start to finish. Oftentimes on the seed packet, it will tell you that those are cold season crops or cool season crops. We typically start cauliflower and broccoli and Brussels sprouts in the greenhouse only 2 to 3 to maybe 4 weeks prior to actually setting them outside. Part of the reason for that is, again, because they are cold crops. You don't want them in that warm greenhouse where they're going to stretch and become a little bit leggy. What you'll do then is take those young seedlings, put them out in the garden, make sure you check those soil temps, and if you really want to start the season early, you can cover that soil. You can use a cold frame, you can use a cloche or row cover to help hold that heat in. You can also use something like walls of water. What you're after is a really good stocky plant of either the broccoli or the cauliflower. Brussels sprouts oftentimes is something we grow as a fall crop because actually the frost helps those little Brussels sprouts get a little bit sweeter. Things like the lettuces and spinach are something that doesn't take really very long from start to finish, from seeding to actual harvest. So you're going to want to wait with those until that soil warms up a bit. Check the package again, make sure that you don't plant too late in the season. Many people will start the romaine lettuces or the head lettuces or the small butter crunch lettuces in containers in the greenhouse, again, just so you can get that jump on the season. You might want to consider some of the root crops as well. Beets, like early season. Radishes, same thing. You're not going to start those in the greenhouse simply because they are such a short crop. However, they are, again, one of those crops that will bolt and become bitter or even woody if they get too warm into the season. Peas are another early season crop. The soil does have to warm a bit for them, but again, you want to plant them when conditions are fairly cool. If the soil is too cool and too wet for any of these early season crops, oftentimes those seeds will rot. So you can take a look at what you like: Swiss chard, beets, kales, lettuces, broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, Brussels sprouts, spinach. All of those are wonderful early season crops, so the gardener can start picking something out of your own garden, putting it on the table, and enjoying it. The upcoming spring is the time to plant your favorites as well as try out some new produce. Most cold season crops can handle a little chilly weather, but it's important to know when to get started. Check the seed package label to determine when you can get them started indoors, but try not to get in too much of a hurry. We go from spinach and lettuce to ornamental grasses. In past shows, we featured a couple of homes that have incorporated prairie plants into their outdoor living spaces. Right now, we'd like to show you some wonderful selections of prairie grasses, as well as other fantastic selections that will be a welcome addition to any landscape. Ornamental grasses are one of the fabulous plants that we can use in any managed landscape, and I absolutely love the character of flame grass in particular. This is a maiden grass, turns a red fall color, has these fine plumy seed heads, spreads a little bit, looks great behind Miss Kim lilac right here at the base of the crabapple, against the prairie backdrop, and with a little bit of the native blue stem right next to it. So what we really have in this instance is the capability of using something with similar texture, a little bit of a different form, a different seed head to make that transition between a prairie landscape and a managed landscape, or you can even use it all by itself in a very formal, structured situation, even an urban environment, a commercial establishment, a business, a tiny little home in town. All of them really have a place for ornamental grasses. One of the great things about the ornamental grasses is the diversity of form and texture and color. We have Carl Forster feather reed grass right behind this perfect artisan stone wall, and it's sort of the soldier of the grasses world. It stands up straight, it goes into seed early in the season so that you can see that seed head during June and July and August. It doesn't spread, it's a clump former, so it really stays in place. Looks great with the Siberian iris, which has kind of the same sort of texture. Then we move on to sort of the giant of the switchgrass world. This is Dallas Blues switchgrass, and it's just this amazing clump of very broad bladed switchgrass. You can probably see a little bit of the color of the purple and the pink in the seed heads on this one. And that movement as the wind blows through it is one of the things that really gives it great texture, as well as being one of those switchgrasses that you might find in the prairie, although you certainly wouldn't find Dallas Blues. And finally, we have little blue stem used as an ornamental grass near this dry creek bed of those flat stones. It's going into its fall color, which is beautiful russets and reds. You can still see the blue in the stems, which is, of course, is where it gets its name. And then we have these fluffy seed heads that really are going to glow in that low autumn light. You really can't beat the ornamental grasses when it comes to putting things together for a spectacular combination for fall. My absolute favorite probably of the maiden grasses is Morning Light, which is right here behind me in this elegant vase-shaped form, variegated foliage, very fine texture, and the ends of the leaves kind of curl almost like a pin curl in a permanent. It's also one of the really late ones to bloom, and the bloom really doesn't contribute to the overall quality of the plant like it does on the flame grass, but that's okay because this elegant form, the color of it, the density of it really sets itself off when you look at it with something like the fruit of the crabapple in the foreground. You look at the sedum at the base of it with a much more bold texture and color, all of which really combines in a really simple landscape to give you spectacular autumn and then winter interest. Sometimes using the ornamental grass as a scale transition can make all the difference in how a landscape looks. And if we look at this fountain grass as the scale element between the low catmint to the foreground and this great big, absolutely gorgeous fernleaf buckthorn in the background, you can see how it's just different enough in height and scale and texture to not make it look as though the catmint is too little or the fernleaf buckthorn is too big. So it's a perfect scale transition element. From our video, you can see just how many grasses you have to choose from. The great thing about these grasses is they have something to offer in almost every season, but they particularly shine in the fall, and they have wonderful winter interest. They can surely fit into just about any area you have in your yard. Over the past few years on our regular Backyard Farmer program, we've shown you numerous features on pruning. There are a lot of gardeners who are somewhat shy when it comes to making the correct cut, and also about the proper time of year to do it. And growing grapes in gardens is becoming more and more popular. In order to have good fruiting and a vibrant, healthy grapevine, you're going to have to do some pruning. Here to help us take some of the mystery out of correctly pruning your grapevines is Extension Educator Vaughn Hammond.
Springtime is a perfect time to be pruning your grapes, especially this year when the temperatures dropped into the -20s. A lot of damage was done to the plants without us even knowing it, and now this time of year with the new growth we can see what's alive and what's not. Let's first do a quick lesson on grapevine anatomy. The structure that goes vertically from the ground to the wire is known as the trunk. Once it becomes horizontal and runs along the wire, it is known as the cordon. From the cordon is last year's growth known as spurs. From those spurs, the growth this year is called a shoot from which this year's fruit will come. There's just a few basic tools that you need when you're pruning grapes. First, your hand pruners for the smaller wood that you'll be cutting. Secondly, the loppers for something that may be a little bit larger. Worst case scenario, the pruning saw for the really large stuff. And then of course, for safety purposes, gloves and safety glasses. Pruning is the removal of plant material to achieve a horticultural goal. And today our goal is to maximize fruit production. We are also working towards maintaining the plant size and form, as well as optimizing the balance between shoot and fruit production. With this particular plant, you can tell that there's a lot of good green growth on it, so it's come through the winter in fairly good shape. What we need to do at this point is reduce the size of the plant itself. And we'll do that by coming in and cutting the canes down to 2 or 3 live buds. And then measure about a fist width, 4 to 6 inches between the spurs, and remove anything in between. We also want to remove any growth that's pointing down that has been damaged by insects or damaged by the winter weather, wind, or hail. Hail damage shows up as scars along the canes. A properly pruned grape has 80 to 90% of its growth removed. As you can see from this plant, there's not very much left from the original plant. All the downward growth has been removed, and all that remains is upward pointing growth that's approximately a fist's width or 6 to 8 inches between the shoots. With a good growing season, you can expect to have a bountiful harvest from these plants.
Remember, most of that preliminary growth that you see each spring will be removed. And as long as you follow the simple idea of removing damaged twigs, cutting out any downward growth, and keeping about 6 inches between shoots, you should have a good shot at producing grapes later in the season. And the best time to prune them is coming right up in February and early March. Valentine's Day is coming up, and there's no way your sweetheart will say no to a dozen roses. But you do have options that will thrill your significant other on Valentine's Day or any other special day in your lives. There's some really great and unique selections out there to choose from. And that's the topic of this week's landscape lesson. We've talked a little bit about taking care of your holiday house plants, and this time of year it's time to talk about sweets for the sweet. So these are Valentine's Day plants or plants for any other occasion where you really think you need to give your special somebody a beautiful blooming plant. Let's start with azaleas, which are absolutely gorgeous. We have a couple here that are very, very different shapes. One is on standard with a twisted trunk. One is in a beautiful hoop or a heart. And of course you can get little tiny ones if you need to, if your budget really won't accommodate these big, beautiful trained ones. We have cyclamen, which has gorgeous foliage, and then flowers that come in a range of colors from white to pink to a deeper pink. This is really one of my favorites because it's pretty unusual. It's anthurium, and especially for Valentine's Day, look at that beautiful, beautiful, beautiful reddish heart with the interesting flower form. Something that's really unusual that you might not even have considered for Valentine's Day or for a special gift is bromeliad, which is quite tropical. And if you look at it, the thing that's so beautiful about it is this center stalk. The cool thing about these too is that the bases of the water hold leaves, so really interesting plant. We have orchids, of course. Orchids are a favorite of many, many people. Very easy to grow, very beautiful with bloom for a long period of time. Little bitty guy here is kalanchoe, and again, these come in multiple different sizes and colors. Thick, fleshy leaves, beautiful flowers for lightening up those dark corners of your home this time of year. And then one of my absolute favorites is hyacinths. So some of the bulbs that have been forced to come into bloom either for Valentine's Day or for late winter give that perfect pop of color. In the case of hyacinths, they are also incredibly fragrant. So go off to the greenhouse, take a peek, breathe in that wonderful oxygen, look at the plants you love for either Valentine's Day or any other special time of the year for your sweetheart. So as we've seen, you don't have to be stuck in a flower rut when it comes to remembering your sweetheart. Take a look around and see what's available, and of course your local garden center professional can help you with ideas if you're undecided. Let's take a few minutes now to answer some of your emailed questions. Remember, if you'd like to submit a question to our show, that email address is byf@unl.edu. We have a question from Papillion, and this is really timely. Last week we had a question about a frost crack in the side of a tree and whether that tree should be expected to survive. It was a maple, thin bark, pretty deep. This one apparently just developed over the last week or so, and of course we've had that really strange weather again. It's in a weeping flowering cherry. A couple of things about weeping flowering cherries. They're grafted. They're usually pretty large trunk to begin with. They do have very thin bark, and we are not necessarily in just the best part of the world to grow cherries successfully. So I hope this one is in a location where it's actually got some protection. Probably what has happened though is that crack has developed, and our viewer says all the way from the base to essentially the crown, about 4 feet up. And it's probably on the south or southwest side where it got heated up in kind of that weird weather we've had. Her question, of course, is whether the tree will survive. She does say it's pretty deep already. I guess what I would really recommend in this case is just see what happens in the spring. Chances are that tree has really been pretty compromised. You might get some flowering. One of the unfortunate things about cherries, however, though, is there are an awful lot of borers that like to make their homes in cherries. We've had a lot of conversations on the regular show about kind of that gooey globs of rosin that come out of the trunk of the tree when the borers get in there. So I would suspect that this is going to be a case where she's going to want to have to replace that particular tree. We have a timely question now from a Fall City viewer, and this is following that snowstorm that we all either appreciated or hated. And what has happened is they have some evergreens that got weighted down with that snow, and those branches have really sort of opened up and fallen over. Their question is, are they going to be doing any damage if they try to get the snow off of those branches? A couple of issues associated with that. First off, we are in a period where chances of that snow actually melting on its own are pretty slim, with night temperatures dropping as low as they're predicted to be. Even though we have some sun, there's not probably going to be a lot of melting going on. So one of the issues is if that snow and potentially ice continues to sit on those branches and we get yet another storm, you're adding additional weight to those branches. What you don't want to do is tap on the top, because that actually causes even more stress on the branch attachment to the tree. You want to lightly tap those branches from beneath, release a little bit of that weight, especially on the ends of the branches, and that will help that tree at least withstand the next onslaught of snow or ice. So be a little bit careful in doing that. You certainly don't want to add additional damage to what might have already occurred. This is a viewer who has a question actually either in advance of next season or as a follow-up to last season. They have apparently been growing squash and all sorts of good edibles like that for a number of years, but recently they've had terrible problems with what they think is vine borers. We have a lot of conversations about this on Backyard Farmer, and they are very, very difficult to control, especially if they get out of control. Ideally, you get them when they're very small and very few, and the problem disappears. The issue is that the adult is a clear-wing moth. They do their flying and their egg laying kind of in that June-July period. The eggs get laid right at the base of the plant, and then you'll see either a little hole or tunneling or the frass, and all of a sudden the plant will wilt. The ideal time to do the treatment on those critters is before they enter the plant. So unfortunately, you really have to be diligent pay good attention. A dust at the base of the stem can help alleviate some of that problem. There's really nothing you can add to the soil, kind of like a pre-emergent for weeds, that will do any good at all for the borers. The other thing you can do is actually plant a later crop, and that would be after the time when the adults are flying. So you're talking, you know, a midsummer to first part of August. What you really have to do then is watch for time to harvest for that particular plant, so you don't have beautiful plants and squash or pumpkins that are too small to harvest. So hopefully that will help. You can cover the plants with row cover. Unfortunately, the issue with that is pollination can't occur. So you have to undo the row cover, let the plants get pollinated, cover them back up again. So hopefully we'll give that viewer a little bit of help when they go to do their squash planting next year. We had a viewer send in a picture of potatoes, and quite a good email about which ones they were seeing more of this rot in. They have Kennebecks and Yukon Golds, and our pathologists think that probably what they're seeing here is Fusarium dry rot of potatoes. And they'd love to see a sample, of course, because that really helps them do a correct diagnosis on it. But it sure looks like that is what it is to them. Interesting thing about that particular Fusarium, as in most of them, it's soil-borne. So, you know, it's going to be in the soil. You're going to have to actually manage the crop differently if you want to if you want to continue to plant potatoes in that particular spot. You want to minimize any cuts at all in the tubers when you dig them. You also want to wait to dig until the tops are 100% dead. Don't cheat it at all and start harvesting before the tops are dead. You need to hold those potatoes and let them harden off for the scar for the stem end after you pick them. And typically that's at a pretty low temperature with a pretty high humidity, about 55 to 60, 90 to 95% humidity for a bit. And then you want to store them in 38 to 40 degree temperatures for the long term. Rotating the crop is always an excellent idea, but again, Fusarium is one of those things that's a little bit hard to manage in the soil. Another popular topic is container gardening. The great thing about containers is if you don't have a backyard, you can still enjoy gardening. And if you do have plenty of space to garden, containers can be used as accents around your outdoor living space. You can grow just about anything in containers, but what makes your ornamental stand out is the combination of the color and texture of the plant and the color and style of the container. For our final feature today, let's take a look at those combinations and how you can make the right partnership between plant and pot. There's so many different containers on the market these days that it's almost impossible to choose one that works for you. The fun part is they're a great way to add a different color and a different texture to your landscape, even without the addition of plants. A couple of interesting things to note, however, is that you have to decide whether you want the container to be the thing that is most interesting or you want the plant to be the thing that is most interesting. And what we're going to look at today is a handful of different colors and how changing out those particular plants really makes the whole composition change. So let's start by looking at a croton. This is a pretty common house plant, really wildly colored and wildly variegated leaves. And in this bright yellow container, the whole thing sort of shines with yellow. If I take the same plant and I tuck it into something that's just a little bit calmer, in this case sort of a toned down terracotta plant, the plant itself shows way more than the container does. This is another one that is really just a very, very wild and interesting plant, and kind of a big red plant at that, because we're talking about basically a dark black and this beautiful red, excuse me. Now if we stick that in a yellow pot, it sort of looks a bit odd. It's kind of too much yellow, too much black and red. We throw it in the green pot, and then we get this bizarre sort of contrast between the deep red and the green. We tuck it in orange, and not quite so good. You get a little bit of orange in these leaves, but not much. Put it back in this one, and then the plant shows up, but it's sort of a low light combination as opposed to the brilliance of this one. So let's take a look at a black plant. This is a rubber plant, and a lot of people are not really familiar with the one that is really more of a deep, dark, purpley black. So the interesting thing here is in a black pot, the black plant totally disappears. You kind of notice the texture. It becomes really a background for something a little bit brighter. So if we take that same plant and we tuck it into a blue pot, the brilliant blue shines a little bit, picks up a little bit on the color of the foliage, but again, not really spectacular. On the other hand, if we take this plant and we put it in the orange, starts to show up a little bit more yet because we've got the dark against the glaze here. Probably the best one is that one, where what we have is the bright chartreusey green, lets those leaves stand out. But again, now your eye is going to focus as much on the color of the pot as it is on the plant itself. So let's take a look at an example of another set of plants that are in a black pot, and that would be the silver. This is a little bit unfair because of course this is a combination rather than just using a single plant. But take a look at how that dark, shiny glaze on this bowl is both contrasting in terms of the glaze to the dullness of these silver leaves. We have great foliage combinations, and really everything in the container stands out more than the container itself. One more thing I want to point out, and that is variegated foliage that really has a lot of pale yellow and pale white in it. And of course you can get lots and lots of different plants, either house plants or outdoor temperennials or even perennials that have this variegation. Look at how the blue and the green help set one another off. So again, you've got lots and lots of combinations that you can use. You either start by choosing the container or you start by choosing the plant, put them together in a grouping that you like, or even individually if you're talking about small containers on a table, or the great big version that can go on the patio itself. Paying attention to the colors you use to combine plants and pots will make a big difference when they are placed around your home. Of course, there's room for the specific tastes of the individual gardener, but just following a few simple guidelines like we've just seen can make a world of difference in how they stand out. We'd like to take a moment to thank the folks at Oak Creek Plants and Flowers here in Lincoln for letting us come in to tape that feature, as well as the landscape lesson this week. We have one announcement, and that would be the Home Builders Association of Lincoln has their home show this weekend, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday at the Lancaster Event Center. Probably going to be a great weekend to go inside and take a look at all of those interesting gardening things that you might want to include in your own home landscape this year. Thank you so much for joining us again for Lifestyle Gardening. We've got one more show for this series, and next time we'll be featuring that all-American favorite, the tomato, and what you can do to prevent cedar apple rust from destroying your apple trees. Good afternoon, good gardening, thanks for watching, and we'll see you all next time.